Hi, we're Julian on the Brown Note and a rather late review of Narcos Mexico Season 3, which is Narcos Season 6, as I think I've reviewed every series so far. I basically don't watch any new TV series. I kind of gave up watching TV because by the end of that golden era where Breaking Bad and everything was finishing, I was like 4 seasons behind on every show and I just gave up completely. But I did jump on board Narcos Mexico, which is in a way the most Breaking Bad show since Breaking Bad, in that it's very, very dynamic and narratively satisfying and kind of Goodfellas-y and very rock and roll, and the cinematography and cast of characters and the stories have been brilliant. And it's been one of the most consistent shows on TV of the last 15 years and gets no credit. No one pays any attention to it. I mean, the current one's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes and no one mentions it. It never comes up at awards time, despite Diego Luna in the first 2 Narcos Mexicos being awards worthy. He was a magnificent performance, one of the best since Bryan Cranston's Walter White. It began as a 2-series show, which was about telling the story of Pablo Escobar. And they did a brilliant job, and it was a fantastic couple of series. And then they sort of carried on with the Cali Cartel, who took over in the vacuum of Pablo Escobar. And then kind of relaunched the show as Narcos Mexico, but there was just a massive overlap. The one thing that was weird is that Narcos Mexico went all the way back to the end of the 1970s, and at the end of the 3rd series of Narcos Mexico, we've only just gone past the end of the 2nd series of the normal Narcos, because about halfway through season 3, you actually see the death of Pablo Escobar again. So it's a really, it's set quite a long time ago. This time around, it's the same as Narcos 1 and 2 in that the main character is gone. So we had Pablo Escobar's gone, and then who's in the vacuum afterwards. This time around we lost Diego Luna as Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo from the Guadalajara Cartel, and he was a pioneer of mass producing marijuana, which was then, the trucking routes were then used by the Colombian cartels to get their cocaine into America, and eventually the Mexican cartels became huge, and the Colombian cartels became the clients of the Mexican cartels as they grew, and they'd already established all these routes. And at the end of season 2, it was this amazing story arc for Diego Luna's character, and he ended up in jail. Somewhere, I believe he is to this day, about 25 years later. So this one is, I think when Narcos Mexico started, everyone thought it would be about El Chapo. But it really hasn't been. And I think everyone thought season 3 would be about El Chapo. But really, it's leading up to the start of El Chapo. And the producers said they aren't going any further, though they are producing a semi-spin-off show about the drug kingpin Griselda, who was a female Colombian drug kingpin inside America. Virtually none of the Narcos series is outside of Mexico, but it's certainly very little of it's in America. But this would be mainly in America. So this time around, we have the guy that took down the Diego Luna character, who was Amado, and who's he played by? Well, you get Scott McNairy, who's been average as an actor so far, but he's absolutely great in this as a DEA agent. A really, really troubled guy. We see at the start he's in an AA meeting, and we find out that he's actually an undercover cop who's pretending to be in an AA meeting, but it kind of fits that he's not pretending that much. And we follow his story throughout the series, which is mostly based on fact. And he's the sort of American conduit. They've done it to varying degrees of success throughout the Narcos, where they've had this American cop. By far the best was when they used a non-American cop, or a semi-American cop, Pedro Pascal, who was brilliant. But this time around we get Scott McNairy. Unfortunately, because they mix up the cast of all 3 series, I'm scrolling through hundreds of names. So Amado Carrillo, who was the Jose Maria Yazpic, who ends up doing the dirty on Felix, and he is the head. He becomes the head of the Juarez cartel. So you've got the two borders. You've got the Juarez border and the Tijuana border, and they're this whole third series is about the battle between these two. The Guadalajara cartel, which is further south and led by Felix, is pretty much wiped out. And on top of that, you get the rise of the Sinaloa cartel, which is El Chapo's mob. So it's a broadly truthful, chronological, rapid-fire, rock and roll version of events. The cast is always great in these. I thought that if I had one problem with this, and there's always one, I'll see if I can find it. It's virtually impossible. There's a young woman that plays a journalist in this, who that's one of the characters is not a real one, but and she's like this idealistic journalist, and we hear about how journalists in Mexico are murdered, and she basically uncovers a lot of real high-level corruption. So the main gist of this story is, on one hand, the Juarez cartel becoming even bigger than Pablo Escobar and becoming the biggest that the world has ever known, and becoming extremely dominant over the other cartels. The other is their connections with the highest-ranking politicians in Mexico, which itself has its own story arc that comes to some kind of fruition. One of the main players in that was actually defended by the Department of Justice in America. And this guy is completely defamed throughout this series as being a massive inroads into the cartels, which he got away with his whole life. They would never have done this. I think it's the first massive high-level accusations of its kind against this guy. He died in 2001. He was connected to, very, very high-ranking politicians in both the US and in Mexico. And he sort of serves as the overboss of everything that happens. But he got away with it his whole life. And there's a young journalist that's sort of chasing him, and she is the weak link for me. I didn't mind her acting in Mexican or Spanish, even though she was a stock character, the idealistic female journalist that's there with a notepad. A little bit too stock and pat for this, but the problem I have with her, she's a narrator, and she shouldn't have been a narrator because her narration in English is actually quite bad. And I didn't like, whenever she was talking, it kind of weakened these very momentous things that she was relaying. I was like, I wish you could have got someone else to do that. I think I think I've given virtually every season of Narcos a 9 out of 10. It's been one of the most consistently brilliant things on TV. And again, this is brilliant. El Chapo isn't as big a character in this as you probably think he's going to be. The producer said that they wanted to take the entirety of Narcos up to the modern era, the jumping off point. And it's worth pointing out that El Chapo was in jail long before any of the modern era. He was in jail and got out and remained out, and that's when the Sinaloa cartel really... It's amazing to think that he had a partner in the Sinaloa cartel that was his equal. One of the best performances in this, one of the best characters... I wish they wouldn't, show all of the characters from all three, because it makes it impossible to find anyone. But there's this guy that runs the fishing boats off of Sinaloa, Mazatlan, one of my favourite places in Mexico. I love Mazatlan. It's an absolutely wonderful place. But he runs his own cocaine shipment business, and he partners up eventually with El Chapo. Now, when have you ever heard of this guy? This guy is still running the Sinaloa cartel 25 years later. I've never even heard his name mentioned. And the chick who's a sister of, I think, the Arellano brothers or something to do with the Tijuana cartel, and this is back in 95. She assumes co-leadership back in the 95. She currently leads the Tijuana cartel to this day. It's absolutely crazy. So I think if there's one, like the female journalist is a bit of a weak link, but so was the American actor that played the cop in the Pablo Escobar ones. And the other thing is the lead up to the end of the last series was one of the most. It was like watching the end of Breaking Bad seasons 3 or 4. It led up to this astonishing events, the incredible meeting as well. This time around, it peters out because the best stuff's in the middle. The best story arc bits where they're really going at each other is fantastic in the middle. And there's some of the best shootouts I've seen in television history. There's one in a nightclub, which is, I think, the best shootout I have ever seen on television. It is something so visceral about it. And it's when El Chapo goes after the Tijuana boys. And it starts playing Enjoy the Silence by Depeche Mode. And it's just so woozily narcotic and menacing the way this shootout unfolds in a nightclub. Some really high-octane shootouts in this. But it kind of peters out a bit towards the end. I thought, like, you know, the mid-section was where all the excitement was. And I think one of the reasons is Amado, who is the biggest drug dealer in the world, is planning to leave at the end. This is all matter of public record. He's going to go away and disappear and never be seen of again. But he died on the operating table having plastic surgery, aged about 40. Rubbish! This guy didn't die on the operating table. He said that he was going to vanish. And he apparently died on the operating table having plastic surgery. This guy did vanish. He is still out there. He left the game. He did amazing. But those aren't the most interesting parts of it. So, not as good as Narcos Mexico seasons 1 or 2. But still with an incredible midsection and still well worth watching. So 8.5 out of 10 easy for Narcos Mexico Season 3.